Gaura Nirvishesha Shunipadi Paschatyagashakarine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Picharine Nirvishesha Shunipadi Paschatyagashakarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhari Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhari Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Hari Bol Hari Bol Jai Gaura Hari Bol Jai Gaura Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Jai Gaura Hari Bol Jai Vaishnava Thakur Jai Vaishnava Thakur Vaishnava Thakur Jai Vaishnava Thakur Jai Vaishnava Thakur Jai Vaishnava Thakur Vaishnava Thakur Jai Vaishnava Thakur Jai Jai Prabhupada Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Jai Prabhupada Prabhupada Jai Jai Prabhupada Shri Nitai Gaur Hari Ki Jai Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Nitai Gaur Vimanande Hari Hari Gaur. So Hare Krishna everyone. Thank you again so much for joining us this evening. We're going to continue in our discussions on the teachings of Lord Caitanya. This is a wonderful work by Srila Prabhupada that's based on the authorized biography of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is called the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So we're up to chapter 27. This is the second part. And we'll begin with our prayers to our spiritual masters for their blessings. so that we can appreciate the discussions today. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gnananjnashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Namo Vishnupataya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shrinivari Paschati Veshadarine. And I also pray for the blessings of all the Vaishnavas, all of you, so that I can do justice to this class, because it's very important for us to have the understanding of these topics correctly, particularly since we're going into very, very wonderful, deep discussions with the conversations of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Ramananda Rai. And so that's actually almost what the title of this chapter is. The title is Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Rai. Right? This is actually, from this point onwards, where Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu starts to go deep into his experience of Srimati Radharani's ecstasies. Right? This is through the association and intervention of Ramananda Rai, Srila Swarup Damodar Goswami, and Jagannath Puri. This is very elevated subject matter, and I hope that we can do justice to it. So we'll begin with the invocation prayer. So verse 18 of the first chapter of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. And the translation is glory to Shri Chaitanya and Nityananda, glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Shri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. Okay. So as we've been doing for the last couple of weeks, we're actually going to glorify Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, because it was the 150th appearance of his anniversary 2 weeks ago. This is part 3, and we'll conclude with part 4 next week. His activities are quite wonderful, and we've been learning so much about him. So I'll just share his darshan so that we can focus on him while we have these discussions of his pastimes. So last week we concluded with him beginning his extraordinary effort of spreading Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message with great vigor, and something called Yukta Vairagya, using everything in the Lord's service. So he was doing things that were not done before, basically, because he was utilizing all the modern instruments for spreading Krishna consciousness. So besides what was used to at the time, opening temples and installing deities and having festivals and distributing prasadam, but he was also undertaking lecture tours. It meant he was traveling a lot. This was not really done, as we said. Most, particularly Vaishnav, elevated Vaishnav personalities, they became Babajis and they retired away from the public eye. But he was not only lecturing widely, but he was also lecturing to the elite, with governors, viceroys, kings. He wanted their assistance in the opening of his temples and projects. He was also staging dioramas, and this was not done before. And he was elevating to the level of Brahmins and sannyasis those who were not born in Brahmin families, and initiating them. So such things were frowned upon, not only by those who are from Brahmin families and who are purists, it is said, those who believe that sannyasi should behave in a certain way, but also by nationalists, people who were trying to organize Indian people against the British. They weren't keen on the attention of people to be turned towards spirituality, like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was doing. But he was not at all in the bodily concept of life. His only interest was engaging everybody in the movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So it didn't matter to him the background of the person, whether they were from a Brahmin family to be initiated, or whether they were a viceroy to be engaged in the Lord's service. Nor was he actually interested in who was ruling over India or not. All he wanted was to spread Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message. So he was having his sannyasis and his brahmacharis traveling throughout India, right? Moving throughout the cities and the towns in a way that was never done before, because the Vaishnavas wanted to live away from the cities. The cities are Maya, right? And even though that may be the case, but we can't leave people in Maya. Right? So he was also opening these large and beautiful temples, in particular from that small temple that they had in Ottadanga Road, where Srila Prabhupada met him in our previous discussions. Now he opened a massive temple, right? Very beautiful marble temple with a conference hall, many rooms, libraries. It was opened in the area called Bhag Bazaar. It was to draw people into the temples so that they could have their consciousness uplifted. And so the temples were now coming into the cities rather than the Vaishnavas going out into the secluded areas for their bhajan. This was the new face of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. And this is the same idea that Srila Prabhupada carried when he opened temples across the world. Right? We are going to the masses to bring them to Krishna. So other ideas were very revolutionary. He was allowing, and himself as a sannyasi, he was allowing his sannyasis to ride in motor cars. They were actually wearing sewn cloth instead of spinning cloth. And they were investing in very modern printing presses, because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur considered that the printing press was the loudest mridanga, Brihat Mridanga, the biggest mridanga for spreading Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan, as well as, of course, the dioramas. So it said that nothing had been ever like this had ever been attempted before, but this is the purview of the Acharya. He knows what can be used in the service of the Lord and how to do so successfully. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he had laid the groundwork because he had revived Vaishnava philosophy. He had accumulated so many of the spiritual works that had been lost, including Chaitanya Charitamrita. He had published those works, and he had published his own works. And with this huge storehouse now, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was armed, and he was distributing it, he was publicizing it, he was writing books on it, right? And this was a sensation. He is an empowered preacher. Also preaching to intellectuals. This is very important as well. He was even initiating them, right, and publishing scholarly works that appealed to them. He was also establishing the footprints of Mahaprabhu wherever the Lord had traveled, and delivering lectures on Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because so much of his teachings had actually been lost. It is said that he was burning with a desire to fulfill Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission. And he also even opened a school in Mayapur that was teaching spiritual instructions in English. And this was quite a sensation as well. It was called the Thakur Bhaktivinoda Institute. So in relation to our discussion today on Srila Ramananda Rai meeting Lord Chaitanya, this is one of the places that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur preached in. He was preaching very widely all over India, but he also preached in this place where Lord Chaitanya and Srila Ramananda Rai met, which is called Kovur, or as we had highlighted on the map last week, Rajamandri today. And what's interesting is that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave Ramananda Rai a copy of the Brahma Samhita. The Brahma Samhita is a very powerful literature that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu found one chapter of when he was traveling in South India. The Brahma Samhita is a very vast work. It's actually spoken by Lord Brahma of the glories of Lord Krishna as Govinda, but it contains a lot of essential Vaishnava truth in it. So one chapter is actually available in the scripture, chapter 5, And it is what we know today as the Brahma Samhita. And we have Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to thank for finding it. He found it at the temple of Lord Vishnu called Adikesha temple. So Mahaprabhu gave Ramananda Rai a description of his travels and told him how he had acquired 2 books in particular, Krishna Karanamrita and the Brahma Samhita. And the Lord said, whatever you have told me about devotional service is all supported by these 2 books. So this is based on the discussions that Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Rai had. So Ramananda Rai, he made a copy of each of the books. And like that, it had been copied by hand all the way to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. But now he wrote a very wonderful commentary, and this is a commentary that we actually have today in the copies distributed by Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had published it on a large scale for the first time in 1932. Of importance, he also completed an English biography of Ramananda Rai. So it's actually interesting the way he did this. So in the first part of the book, he writes about the biographical facts of Ramananda Rai's life. And then after that, in the second section, he speaks about his true identity. And the understanding we have from that is that through the writings of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, we actually get to know more about Ramananda Rai, indicating that only through one Vaishnava do we actually get the understanding of great Vaishnavas. So we must always go through the Acharyas to get the right understanding of these personalities. So he also established deities and opened a Gaudiya Math temple at the site of the meeting between Lord Chaitanya and Ramananda Rai. We actually had the good fortune of having darshan at that beautiful temple that he opened. It's quite magnificent and it's very well maintained. It's on the banks of the Godavari River. So later, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur traveled to Vrindavan, and although it was quite a wonderful, well-organized parikrama, he had a lot of opposition from the caste Brahmanas, who had a problem with him offering Brahmin status to those who were not born in Brahmin families. The protest was so severe that the party was actually stoned, and the shops would close and refuse to offer them provisions. Nevertheless, he tried to meet with them to try and discuss these topics and convince them that it was actually the desire of Srila Sanatana Goswami. Srila Sanatana Goswami is very dear to the people of Vrindavan because of all his wonderful efforts in preserving the holy places and the message of Krishna Bhakti. And the teaching of initiating people of quality, no matter what their birth is, that's coming from the messages of Srila Sanatana Goswami. So although Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had some success in convincing people of this, still he encountered a lot of opposition. Nevertheless, he continued to Kosi, which is in Vrindavan, in Braj Mandal, and that's where Srila Prabhupada met him. At the time, Srila Prabhupada was not initiated, and he had already accepted Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as his spiritual master. But because he was running his business in Allahabad, today known as Prayagraj, he wasn't always able to meet with his spiritual master. But here he actually traveled to this parikrama, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur noticed that Srila Prabhupada, he likes to hear. He does not go away. So he was marked at this time. Then Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur went to Prayagraj. He laid the cornerstone of another Gaudiya Math, also another place we're fortunate enough to have darshan of, very beautiful temple. And he initiated Srila Prabhupada there. Srila Prabhupada got first and second initiation in January 1933. Again, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur noting Srila Prabhupada's his affinity for hearing, and he said, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said, I have marked him, I will make him my disciple. So he was making so many disciples, in fact, that Subhash Chandra Bose, the very, very significant freedom fighter in India's history. He met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and complained to him that you're turning all these people into devotees of Krishna, and they're actually giving up the nationalist cause. Actually, Srila Prabhupada was one of them. Srila Prabhupada was a nationalist when he met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he also gave up that occupation for devotional service. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur very humorously dismissed Mr. Bosch, telling him that these people are very skinny, they're not going to make very good freedom fighters, just let them eat some prasadam and serve Krishna. And it was more because he understood, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur understood that the prime concern of humanity is actually spiritual development and not these temporary conditions, like who is the ruler of the country. So in that way, he progressed and actually transformed the face of Vaishnavism in India. Actually, the whole face of spirituality in India. So we'll conclude this part of our discussion on his wonderful pastimes today, and we will continue next week. And for now, we will carry on our discussions on the teachings of Lord Caitanya. So last week we concluded with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu visiting the very beautiful and wonderful temple of Jayada Nrsimhadev. Right? This is the form of Lord Nrsimhadev as Lord Varahadev and Lord Nrsimhadev together in Singhachalam. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is progressing in his travels in South India. After visiting the temple of Jayada Nrsimha, the Lord proceeded further into South India and ultimately reached Vidyanagar on the bank of the Godavari river. While on the bank of this river, the Lord remembered the Yamuna river in Vrindavan, and he considered the trees on the bank to be the forest of Vrindavan. Thus he was in ecstasy there. After taking a bath in the Godavari, the Lord sat near the bank and began chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this is a wonderful example of the Lord who had traveled to South India to preach the holy names, but he was also practicing the chanting of the holy names. This is the Acharya. This is one who teaches by example. So it's not like in academic knowledge where what we tend to find is when one has mastered the subject, right, whatever that subject may be, then one gives up the practice of it, right, the studying of it, the exams on that subject, and then one just engages maybe in teaching others, right? So sort of preaching without practicing. So it seems to make sense in the academic world, but that's not how it works in spiritual life. In spiritual life, we don't just wait for the practice to be over, right? We've all had that experience of waiting for something to be over, waiting to finish school, waiting to finish university, to get over with the degree or the diploma or the course, and then just kind of have our freedom to do as we want. Spiritual life doesn't work in the same way. In spiritual life, the practice is the goal also. So the practice is devotional service. But ultimately, the goal is also devotional service, because when the practice is perfected, then one attains the spiritual world, and there the practice goes on in the perfected state. That's the actual understanding of what spiritual life is about. If we come to that understanding, the wrong understanding, like we have in material life, that we can make some advancement in spiritual life, and then when we're suitably situated, we can give up the practice. We fall from the position, we fall from what we have achieved in spiritual life. And this can happen at any stage, right? Even if we've attained a very high spiritual position, right? Like that of even Bhava, like Bharat Maharaj. We remember the history of Maharaj Bharat. He was an extremely advanced devotee who could walk away from all of his wonderful material possessions. He was a king. He had a wonderful family. He had great wealth, and he is said to be quite young. But he walked away from everything to engage fully in devotional service. This is how advanced he was spiritually. And these surpassing asakti, which is the stage of where we give up all material attachments. But even at that level of bhava, he fell down. So we have to remember that we are never safe in our spiritual advancement, that we can give up the practice of devotional service a little bit and become a little bit relaxed. Sri Prabhupada said many times, not to scare us, but just to make us aware. He said that spiritual life is like a razor's edge. If we just slip a little bit, we could actually cause a great disturbance to our spiritual activities. So it's ultimately for our own good. Whatever we're doing in spiritual life is to attain that ultimate goal. So we don't want to slip and then actually lose our footing in spiritual life. It's sometimes very debilitating. Sometimes people never recover from that, or if one does, it takes some time and some effort. And certainly, we don't want to risk what happened to Maharaj Bharat, where he had to come back in his next life, to learn his lesson, and then he had to come back again in order to perfect it as a human being. So we want that we keep making progress in spiritual life, that we take this practice of devotional service to its ultimate goal. So we said that whereas the fact that we're engaging in devotional service doesn't change, that devotional service does change with our advancement. It becomes purer, it becomes perfected, and we become purer and perfected. We become more peaceful, and these material desires don't trouble us anymore. We eventually won't have that feeling that we just want to be free of the regulations of spiritual life, and we just want to do our own thing, right? The way when we're free of studies, we just want to be free and do our own thing. With our advancement in spiritual life, the regulations are not a chore. They're not something that is enforced upon us. They're natural because we get the spiritual understanding of why we're actually following them. And the practices of spiritual life are not something we want to escape anymore. It's something that we want to do exclusively for eternity, actually. So Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 9, text 2, very famous verse, Rajvidya Rajagohyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam Pratyakshagamam Dharmyam Susukham Kartum Avyayam. Of devotional service, he says, it is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting and it's joyfully performed. So this is why devotional service is everlasting. Why would we not want to give up something that is the purest knowledge, that which helps us understand ourselves by realization, that which is the perfection of religion, and that which is joyfully performed? This is actually our true occupation. This is actually what our eternal dharma is, Sanatana Dharma. While sitting and chanting, the Lord saw that the governor of the province, Sri Ramananda Rai, had reached the banks of the river, accompanied by his associates, which included a musical band and many brahmanas. So if you find it a little surprising, because Ramananda Rai was a pure devotee, that he was moving about in this way, he was also a governor. We know politicians, they have an entourage. But the important thing is that Ramananda Rai was completely detached from all of this pomp, from all of this activity, right? From all of the enjoyment. Right? He was a pure devotee, despite his outer appearance. Previously, the Lord had been asked by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to visit the great devotee Ramananda Rai at Kabur, right? Also known as Kuvur, as we read earlier. The Lord could understand that the man approaching the river bank was Ramananda Rai, and he desired to see him immediately. But because he was in the renounced order of life, he restrained himself from going to see a person involved in political affairs. So this is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's example to all of us. Lord Chaitanya at this point was a sannyasi. Right? He had given up all connection with material life. And as a renunciant, a sannyasi does not associate associate with those who are involved in material life, right? Worldly men, rich men, influential men, right? Like Ramananda Rai appeared externally. And this is very important because a sannyasi can be influenced by the consciousness of such people to fall down from their position of renunciation. And this is quite a catastrophe. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was very strict about that, and he wouldn't meet any worldly men, right? People who are deeply involved in the activities of the material world, particularly politicians, including kings. And so not just Ramananda Rai, but Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also kept his distance initially from the king of Orissa, Maharaj Prataparudra. Actually, there's a connection between Ramananda Rai and Maharaj Prataparudra, as we read last week, that Ramananda Rai was in the employ of Maharaj Prataparudra. That Prataparudra was his boss, we could say. Right? Ramananda Rai was a governor. So the king, he very much wanted to have darshan of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to Puri, Maharaj Prataparudra had heard about this extraordinary sannyasi, and he approached Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was also an employee of the king. He was the court scholar. So the king wanted to have darshan, and by that point Lord Chaitanya had left for his travels in South India. So when Lord Chaitanya returned, the king again asked Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to make this arrangement for him, and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu refused repeatedly. Right? No matter how many times he was asked, and no matter how many devotees actually went on behalf of the king to Lord Chaitanya, the Lord refused. He would not hear of it. So eventually he acceded on a few points. He sent his garments to the king as prasadam, and he mercifully met the king's son, because the son of a man is regarded as his representative, but still the Lord would not meet him. So the king, however, besides his own great devotion, he also had another a very important factor in his favor. He had the mercy of great devotees. Ramananda Rai by then had been pardoned by the king, or been discharged by the king from his services with a full pension, which is quite nice of the king, so that Ramananda Rai could associate with Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we could say full time, in the Lord's relishing the emotions of Srimati Radharani. So Ramananda Rai, therefore, of course, had a favorable impression of the king, and so did Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. So because he got the mercy of these personalities, Lord Chaitanya would certainly show him mercy. But in the interim, the Lord was making a very, very strong point. He was making a strong point that even though the king had done nice things for devotees, the Lord didn't meet him on those terms. And so that he was setting the example for future, where those who are wealthy or influential might try to buy their favor, the favor of spiritual persons or the Lord, by doing things like how the king had done, or just by their influence and by their power, by their wealth. So Lord Chaitanya, in repeatedly denying him darshan, was making this clear, as well as testing the king's humility, his determination, and his devotion. So the king passed on all accounts, because he remained very firmly situated in his devotion to Lord Jagannath, to Lord Chaitanya, and in his humility. So when the Rath Yatra, the time for the Rath Yatra came around in Puri, he took the dress of an ordinary person, and he went before Lord Jagannath, and he swept the road in front of the cart. And this pleased Lord Chaitanya, to see that he could give up his royal attire and his position to perform this menial act. And Lord Chaitanya gave him quite extraordinary mercy. At the time, there were 7 chanting parties. Lord Chaitanya was actually present in all of them. He actually expanded himself, but not everyone could see that. But Maharaj Prataparudra, by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, he actually got that darshan. He was able to see Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu chanting and dancing in all 7 parties. So this was quite extraordinary. But even more than that, when Lord Jagannath's cart eventually stopped and Lord Chaitanya needed a bit of a rest because he had been chanting and dancing so ecstatically for so long, Lord Caitanya and his associates went to the Jagannath Vallabh Gardens, which is nearby, and Lord Caitanya took some rest. So again, Maharaj Prataparudra, dressed as an ordinary devotee without any airs or graces, he came there, he humbly greeted all the devotees, and he got the opportunity to massage Lord Caitanya, so to speak. And again, because of his humility, Lord Caitanya gave him that service, although the Lord was in his ecstasies and he didn't appear to recognize who the king was. So the king was reciting wonderful prayers of the gopis when Krishna disappeared from them during the Rasa dance. And Lord Chaitanya was relishing this, right? And he kept telling he kept telling the king, please go on, please go on. And then eventually the king came to the very beautiful verse, very famous verse, Tavakatamritam tapta jivanam kavir bhir iritam kama shapaham Shavana Mangalam Shrimadatam Bhuvi Bhuri Dhanajana. And the translation is, the nature of your words and the descriptions of your activities are the life and soul of those suffering in this material world. These narrations, transmitted by learned sages, eradicate one's sinful reactions and bestow good fortune upon whoever hears them. These narrations are broadcast all over the world and are filled with spiritual power. Certainly those who spread the message of Godhead are most munificent. So we can understand how this verse has a special meaning to Lord Chaitanya. And when he heard this, he was in so much ecstasy, he embraced the king. What can we imagine? He actually embraced the king, although he was still pretending not to know who the king was, right? And then he actually thanked the king for his nice service in reciting these verses. And he asked him who he was, and the king just humbly replied that he was just a servant of the Lord and the devotees. So this is the extraordinary mercy that was eventually granted to him. But like we said, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he made very strong statements about the behavior of a sannyasi before that. So in the same way here with Ramananda Rai, he held back on going to meet Ramananda Rai. He stayed on the banks of the Godavari chanting, and it was Ramananda Rai who actually went to approach him, Lord Chaitanya. Being a great devotee, Ramananda Rai was attracted by the features of Lord Chaitanya, who appeared as a sannyasi, and he himself came to see the Lord. So Ramananda Rai was also attracted to the appearance of the Lord, as the Lord was attracted to the appearance of his pure devotee. Upon reaching Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Ramananda Rai prostrated himself to offer his obeisances and respects. Lord Chaitanya received him by vibrating Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. When Ramananda Rai presented his credentials, Lord Chaitanya embraced him, and both of them were overwhelmed with ecstasy. The Brahmanas who accompanied Ramananda Rai were surprised to see them embracing in transcendental ecstasy. The Brahmanas were all stalwart followers of the rituals, and they could not understand the meaning of such devotional symptoms. Indeed, they were rather surprised to see such a great sannyasi touch a Shudra, and they were also surprised to see Ramananda Rai, who was great governor and practically king of that province, crying simply by touching a sannyasi. Lord Chaitanya understood the Brahmana's thoughts, and considering the unfavorable situation, he pacified himself. So there's so much that we can understand from this exchange. That Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, despite being a Brahmin by birth and now in the most advanced spiritual category of a sannyasi, he didn't care about Ramananda Rai's status, essentially as outward status, as a Shudra, as a fourth class person. He embraced him with so much love and affection. And in return, Ramananda Rai was practically a king, right? A very powerful and opulent person. And he didn't consider Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu some humble sannyasi who was just sitting on the banks of a river without any possessions in the world. Right? Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was traveling literally with the cloth he was wearing, with his water pot and his one servant. This servant, of course, he didn't want also, but Lord Nityananda, out of concern for his safety and well-being, he sent this person along. But other than that, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was just, it could be seen as an ordinary mendicant, yet Ramananda Rai was so ecstatic upon meeting him. So this is very unusual for these brahmanas who are followers basically of only the rituals. Right? In the rituals of worship of the Supreme Lord, there's no emotion. The emotion is thought of as something that's less than rituals and intellectualism. The irony is that spiritual emotion is very different. With spiritual emotion, one can only attain to it after one has perfected spiritual knowledge and therefore has surpassed all intellectualism. This is the advanced level of spiritual emotion, because then one is sharing this emotion with God, with the Supreme Lord. One only shares emotion with someone when one is on a very close level with them. If one knows a king, for example, on a professional basis, then there is the exchange of ideas and information. But if one knows the king on a personal level and one can exchange laughter, sorrow, and so on, then that is, of course, a much more deeper relationship. That's a much more profound relationship. So it's the same with God. The close confidants of the Lord can never be compared to those who only know him on an intellectual level. In the same way, the close confidants of a king or any ruler for that matter, they're not the ones who know his sorrow, his joys, what brings him happiness, peace. Right? Those persons can't be compared to those who just have a formal relationship with him. So this is the understanding that we have of what someone who is on a ritualistic level, like a caste Brahmin in particular, how we compare that to a devotee of the Lord who has actually attained to the spiritual emotion. When one is becoming a confidant of the Lord, able to share the emotions of God. This is not something to be taken lightly at all. So this is the kind of level that Ramananda Rai had achieved. Now, of course, the problem was that the Lord understood that these persons could become a little offensive. They were already becoming offensive in their thinking because they couldn't understand what was going on between these two transcendental personalities, Lord Caitanya and Ramananda Rai. So the Lord decided to curtail his emotions at that point and meet Ramananda Rai at a suitable time and place where persons who wouldn't understand their exchanges, where they wouldn't be present. After this, Lord Caitanya and Ramananda Rai sat down together. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya has spoken very highly of you, Lord Caitanya informed him. So I have come to see you. So we remember that before Lord Caitanya set off for South India, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya asked a promise from the Lord that he would meet Ramananda Rai. See, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, we remember, was initially a Mayavad philosopher. And because of that, he didn't appreciate devotees of Krishna, considering them, again, sentimentalists, considering them inferior to his intellectualism. So, although he had known Ramananda Rai as a very dear devotee of Krishna, he didn't think of him at the time as a very elevated personality. But after Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had transformed Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya to devotional service, then Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya understood how elevated Ramananda Rai was in spiritual life. So he asked Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to please meet him. So Ramananda Rai then said, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya considers me one of his devotees. Ramananda Rai replied, therefore he has kindly recommended that you see me. Now, obviously, in thinking from an impersonalist perspective, a devotee like Ramananda Rai might be thought of as an inferior, or as he says here, a devotee. But actually now Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya really appreciated Ramananda Rai very much. Ramananda Rai very much appreciated the Lord's touching a man of wealth. Generally, a king, governor, or any politician is always absorbed in thoughts of political affairs in pounds and shillings, pence. Therefore, such persons are avoided by sannyasis. Right? So if one is involved too much in money, right, this being a key factor in corrupting renunciants are meant to avoid their company. Srila Prabhupada explains quite extensively in many places in the Srimad Bhagavatam that one should not desire the wealth of others. One should not spend too much time in their company. One should not um, depend on them for anything that will prolong one's association with those who own wealth, even if it's not substantial wealth. And like the description is given of Srila Shukadev Goswami in the first canto, that he would only stay at a householder's at their place of residence long enough for a cow to be milked, meaning long enough for them to gather a cup of milk to offer him. And obviously, there were no refrigerators in those days, so the cow was milked fresh. So if he went for Madhukari door to door, right, the renunciant goes from door to door to beg a little provision for their meals. So he would just take some milk from the householders, but for their benefit, not that he was hungry. But he would only stay there long enough to take that cup of milk. Sorry. He would only stay there long enough to get that cup of milk. And then he would move on. So this is important for all renunciants to understand, so that they don't get trapped by spending too much time in the company of householders, of wealthy people, of those involved in worldly affairs, and then wanting what they have. This is what Srila Prabhupada notes, that they should never have a desire for what the householders have. This is also important because when a renunciant leaves behind the world, it's so that they can become fully dependent on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If one loses that dependence on Krishna and instead becomes dependent again on worldly things and on worldly people, then one has fallen away from spiritual life. Right? And it's quite a tragedy for one to come so far to the level of renunciation and then lose all the footing that one has made by again becoming dependent on material things. So therefore, a renunciant has to be very vigilant against those thoughts even creeping into their consciousness. So just like Shukadev Goswami had engaged the householders in offering something, whether it was a cup of milk or some provision for his meal or maintenance. In the same way, sannyasis, renunciants, they engage the services of wealthy people, but for their benefits. So this means that the renunciant has to be very careful that they're only engaging such a person for their spiritual benefit and not as a state of dependence. Right? Like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, like we were discussing earlier on, he engaged a lot of very wealthy people, right? And some of them even politicians of the day, like the viceroys, the kings, and others. He met many very eminent persons in society in order to engage them in the service of the Lord. If they weren't engaged through their wealth or through their influence or through their other material possessions, they might not end up doing devotional service to the Lord. So this was his mercy on them. Srila Prabhupada also did the same. He also met a lot of respected persons, wealthy persons, and even pop stars. We remember that Srila Prabhupada very mercifully preached to the Beatles, but both Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Srila Prabhupada were demonstrating that they were showing mercy and not becoming dependent on these persons. Right? They were engaging them to a point, but then they were not being influenced by them towards materialism. And they were not depending on them for the movements to continue. Right? It could have been thought of at the time that to engage the Beatles in Krishna consciousness might mean that it might spread, right, more further. And although they had been involved in propagating the holy name to some degree through records, although that made Hare Krishna more of a household name, especially in Europe and in the Americas, what made people come to Krishna consciousness and stay in Krishna consciousness was Srila Prabhupada. It was the purity of the renunciant. Because Krishna doesn't belong to those who are wealthy or influential. This Queen Kunti says in Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 8 of Canto 1, two very famous verses, 6 and 7. Sorry, 26 and 27. My lord, your lordship can easily be approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted. One who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and bodily beauty, cannot approach you with sincere feeling. My obeisances are unto you who are the property of the materially impoverished. You have nothing to do with the actions and reactions of the material modes of nature. You are self-satisfied, and therefore you are the most gentle and are master of the monas. So this means that those who do not have anything, they can have Krishna. There's nothing material that's holding them back from having him. And so the renunciants are the ones most qualified to preach, because they have Krishna to give him to everyone else. If someone's glass is already full, you can't fill it anymore. If their arms are already full of material things, you can't add any more to it. And so to the degree that we're materially detached, we become spiritually attached to Krishna. And so a renunciant is the most attached to Krishna, like the one who possesses Krishna, who Queen Kunti says Krishna is a property of them. So it's very important for a renunciant to stay in that position so that they can continue to have Krishna and give him to others successfully. So I think we'll stop here and continue our discussions next week on this very wonderful chapter. I think we'll conclude it actually. It's not a very long chapter, but the discussions are going to, between Ramananda Rai and Lord Chaitanya, will continue in the next few chapters till the end. So please stay with us and hear about their wonderful, wonderful discussions on spiritual life. Shri Srinivasa Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Shri Ramananda Rai Ki Jai, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Srinivasa Gaura Premī Devi Dasi. So thank you all for your kind attention. Are there any questions or comments or anything that I can try and clarify? Anything to correct?
Hare Krishna, dear Mataji, please accept my humble obeisances. Thank you very much for wonderful class. I am in small confusion about the lost part from Brahma Samhita, which Lord Chaitanya went to found it, and after he found this in a temple, he handed this paper to Ramananda Rai
to make a copy.
And now we have, yes, and now Brahma Samhita is full, or the last part is lost.
So actually, yeah, most of it is lost. Lord Chaitanya only found the 5th chapter. So the 5th, I think there's 100 chapters if I'm not mistaken. So so that 5th chapter is the one that Lord Chaitanya copied, and then which he allowed Ramananda Rai to copy, and which was being passed down by the devotees hand copying that same 5th chapter of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's. And then Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur started printing out, publishing that 5th copy with his commentary. That's the same commentary that we have today, that our Bhaktivedanta Book Trust is publishing. So so yeah, that which we have now is that same 5th chapter that Lord Chaitanya found there. All the rest has been lost, unfortunately. Is that okay, Mataji?
Thank you, dear Mataji. Thank you very much. Dandava pranams. Haribol.
Yeah, so it's a shame. We've lost a lot of the scriptures, but we also have the mercy of all our acharyas who've given us their own realizations and commentaries. So we actually have so much more to read that we may not even complete in a lifetime, I think. Especially seeing how we're going through Srimad Bhagavatam so slowly. So so we're very, very fortunate in that regard. Are there any more comments or questions? If not, then we will just sing one wonderful bhajan in glorification of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. His appearance day is coming up on the 25th of this month. We're trying to, well, we, by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, have been having discussions on his teachings and pastimes throughout the year, but particularly in the run-up to his appearance day, we're trying to increase our consciousness of him. So we'll sing this bhajan in his glorification. Also, in the last few days, we've been we've been observing the appearance of a few transcendental personalities. It was the disappearance day of Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj on Monday, and it was also the disappearance day of, double check, I sometimes get my days mixed up. It was also the disappearance day of Srila Rasikananda. Srila Rasikananda was actually the disciple of Srila Shamananda Pandit, a member of that a very famous, wonderful second generation of preachers that organized the first, you could say, Harinam Sankirtan book distribution party in India. Rasikananda was a wonderful disciple of the spiritual master, a true successor to him, a great preacher in Orissa. And of course, Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj is our preceptor, Acharya. He was the Shiksha Guru of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, very, very profound personality. And today's appearance we have Purushottam Das Thakur, very dear associates of Lord Nityananda. So we offer our obeisances to all of them and pray for their mercy so that we can appreciate Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu better. And we will now sing this bhajan, Puranga Balite Have. And praise the Lord Chaitanya and his associates. Gauranga Bolite Have, Golaka Sharira. Gauranga Bolite Have, Golaka Sharira. Hari Hari Bolite Na, Yani Babenira. Hari Hari Bolite Na, Yani Babenira. Araka Benita Chande, Koruna Hoibe. Araka Benita Chande, Koruna Hoibe. Samsara Basana Mor, Kapa Tuche Habe. Samsara Basana Mor, Kabe Tuche Habe. Vishaya Chariya Kabe, Shudha Bhimana. Vishaya Chariya Kabe, Shudha Bhimana. Kabe Hama Hera Boshi Vrindavana. Kabe Hama Hera Boshi Vrindavana. Rupa Raghunatha Pade, Hoibe Akuti. Rupa Raghunatha Pade, Hoibe Akuti. Kabe Hama Bhuja Base, Yugala Piriti. Kabe Hama Bhuja Base, Yugala Piriti. Rupa Raghunatha Pade, Rahu Moe Asha. Rupa Raghunatha Pade, Rahu Moe Asha. Pratana Kuroi Sada Naratamudasa Pratana Kuroi Sada Naratamudasa Jaya Gora Hari Gora Hari Gora Hari Jaya Gora Hari Gora Hari Gora Hari Jaya Vaishnava Thakur Vaishnava Thakur Vaishnava Thakur Jaya Vaishnava Thakur Jaya Vaishnava Thakur Jaya Vaishnava Thakur Vaishnava Thakur Jaya Vaishnava Thakur Prabhupada 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 Jai Prabhupada 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 Jai Prabhupada. So read the translation. When will that opportune moment come to us when there will be shivering of the body as soon as we chant Lord Gauranga's name? While chanting Hare Krishna, when will there be tears in the eyes? When will I obtain the mercy of Lord Nityananda Chandra? When by his mercy will the desire for material enjoyment become very insignificant? When the mind is completely purified, being freed from material anxieties and desires, then I shall be able to understand Vrindavan and the conjugal love of Radha and Krishna, and then my spiritual life will be successful. When will I be very much eager to study the books left by the 6 Goswamis headed by Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Raghunath Das Goswami? By their instruction, I shall be able to properly understand the loving affairs of Radha and Krishna. My only aspiration is to attain the lotus feet of the 6 Goswamis headed by Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Raghunath Das Goswami. Narottam Das constantly prays to attain their lotus feet. Shri Srinivasa Gaura Hari Ki Jai. Srila Narottam Das Thakur Ki Jai. Srila Rasananda Acharya Ki Jai. Srila Raghunath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Srila Purushottam Das Thakur Ki Jai. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Jai. Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Jai. Srila Bhakti Sant Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Shri Srinivasa Gaura Premī Devi Dasi Hari Hari Bol. Okay, so again, thank you all so much for joining us, for your kind attention, and please join us again next week. Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna, everyone.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.